In this video, I'm going to talk about 4 things new woodworkers just don't seem to know. It's like someone forgot to send out the new woodworker handbooks. What? That's not a thing. There is no handbook? Okay, well, let's get into it. This video is sponsored by Shopify. One of the things that draws people into woodworking is the thought of building something yourself and feeling that very real sense of accomplishment. But another thing that draws them in is this idea that you can build something cheaper than you can buy it. I mean, that one idea may be the foundation for the entire DIY movement. So, is it true?
In a sense, yes. But in another truer sense, no, it is not.
In my opinion, the DIY culture and bad video after bad video here on YouTube has totally destroyed the expectation of what something should realistically cost to build. And I get that there are people out there whose highest aspiration is to build a rustic headboard or an X-brace table and call it a career. And that's totally fine, but once they look at the material cost, fastener cost, and all that walnut stain to make it look like that IKEA hack that they saw on Pinterest, they're really not saving much money over just buying the thing on Etsy. And besides the cost of materials, there is the question of tools. And I can't tell you how many times I've gotten comments on my videos like, step 1, buy $10,000 worth of tools, or how much did those cabinets cost you after you bought a whole workshop? And you know what? They're right. Tools can be expensive, but they do have a finite cost. And once you pay for them, they're essentially yours forever, so they don't really count towards the cost of any one project, because you can use them over and over and over again in future projects. And you don't have to buy your tools all at once. You can buy them only as you need them, building up your shop slowly, one project at a time. So, assuming that you're not going to buy a bunch of tools to do one project and then quit woodworking forever, how are you going to make this thing pay off and start to turn the tables in your favor? Well, speaking of tables, this dining table and bench set that I built cost me about $1,500 in materials. But I could have easily spent $5,000 on a set like that, custom made by someone else. And this chicken coop cost about $1,200, and after my chickens lay approximately 6,000 eggs, it'll pay for itself. Alright, so it doesn't always work out, but that's the point. You have to pick the projects that are going to make the savings happen. Kitchen cabinets are a great place to save absolute piles of cash, and there are a lot of videos out there explaining the cost difference between building your own and buying them off the shelf. Never mind the fact that there is an enormous quality difference between custom-built plywood cabinets and the off-the-shelf cabinets that are often made out of particle board or MDF. One of the most common questions I get on my videos is, where do you get that wood? And it's usually followed by something like, they don't sell that at my local fill-in-the-appropriate blue or orange home center. And I guess this is just another disconnect created by the DIY movement, which is heavily centered around building stuff out of 2x4s and 2x6s. But trust me, going to the big box store to buy your project materials is the absolute last thing that you want to do. That stuff is just not produced with woodworking in mind. And look, I was in the same spot when I started building things. 12 years ago, back when I had nothing but a job site table saw, a Craig jig, and a drill, I built my first piece of furniture. The ubiquitous farmhouse coffee table. It's a fine piece of furniture unless you expect to set a drink on top of it. And check out these breadboard ends. When I built this thing, these were flush with the sides, but these 2x6s had so much moisture in them when I made this. Over time, they dried out and
significant shrinkage.
Oh yeah, I set myself up for years of carving chunks out of my skin every time my shin got too close to the edge. So everybody has to start somewhere, and I suppose that the big box stores serve that purpose, but the problem I see is that no one knows how to get to that next level of acquiring things like walnut, maple, or mahogany, or plywoods like Baltic birch or other high-end plies like the pre-finished ply that I use to build my cabinets. And unless you're a furniture company, there's a whole unseen world out there that goes unnoticed by you because it doesn't look like the typical places that you buy stuff from. So, the next time you're out on the interwebs, I want you to try these Google searches and see what comes up. Hardwood lumber dealer, hardwood lumber company, sawmills near me that sell lumber, plywood warehouse, or plywood distributor. And the key here, I think, is to always specify hardwood lumber in your search. Otherwise, you're just going to come up with your local building supply companies that sell the same 2x4s that the big box store sells. Another good thing to search for are companies that use this type of material. So, go back to Google and search for these types of places in your area. custom cabinet companies, handmade furniture, and millworks. And millworks are just places that make trim work and molding for your home. If you're finding places like this in your area, these guys have to be getting their raw materials from somewhere, and likely those suppliers aren't too far away because lumber is very large, heavy, and expensive to transport. I do acknowledge that some of you watching this video right now may have to drive a long way to find places like this, but if you do live in a rural area like that, there are still some things that you could take advantage of, and that's because there's always a guy or a gal running a sawmill somewhere cutting up local trees into lumber and drying them in a kiln, or just stacking the lumber in a barn and forgetting about it for 20 years. And I've had some of the biggest lumber scores of my life this way. And yeah, it does take a little bit more time and patience setting up searches on Google or Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist looking for hardwood lumber or sawmill lumber. But when you find those resources, you can often get some amazing scores of really cheap hardwood lumber, much cheaper than what you would pay at normal retail locations. This video is all about learning new things, and if you're wondering how to start selling the products you make quick and easy, Shopify can help. Shopify is a commerce platform for new or existing businesses that allow you to sell your product online or in person, and they even integrate with social media. They made it super easy for me to build my own store with a custom domain and lots of great templates to make it look really awesome. If you're currently selling on one of the big open marketplace sites, you know how it can feel being crammed into the same space, competing with thousands of other sellers for that customer dollar. But if you have your own custom domain, all customer eyes are focused on your product. And who wouldn't want that situation? That's a goal that every seller should be shooting for. And they even have a great in-person selling option, Shopify POS with Tap to Pay for iPhone. And you can get all these features even in their most affordable plan. There's a link down below. Just go to shopify.com/MWA Woodworks and take the first step in getting your new shop set up today. And thanks to Shopify for sponsoring this video. Another very common fear of new woodworkers is the fear of screwing up and ruining that very expensive material that you bought because you cut a piece too short or you put that joinery in the wrong location. And the default tendency to alleviate that fear is to buy a set of woodworking plans and follow them to the letter of the law, cutting out all the parts up front based on the exact dimensions in the cut lists, making sure to measure twice and cut once just like they told you, and then start slapping everything together. And you may think that you're taking the simplest, most foolproof approach here, but you're going to set yourself up for problems as you go through your build because of natural variabilities in the materials, not to mention the fact that the way we name these materials isn't always a reflection of the actual dimensions of the material. Take this plywood, for example. In most places, this is going to be referred to as 3/4 inch plywood, but in reality, it's closer to 23/32. But wait, there's more. These plywood sheets can vary slightly even in thickness from one sheet to the next sheet, and sometimes even vary in thickness from one part of the sheet to a different part of the same sheet. The same thing applies if you're buying pre-surfaced lumber. Something labeled 4/4 or 1 inch is probably more like 13/16, which is actually closer to 3/4 than it is to 1 inch.
I hate so much about the things that you choose to be.
More experienced woodworkers are aware of this and have developed a way to deal with it called referential measurement. For example, let's say you want to make a dado in this plywood that'll house another sheet of plywood. Maybe it's a shelf or something. If you think to yourself, I'll just cut a 3/4 inch dado, well then you're going to end up with a very sloppy fit. A better approach is to make smaller cuts using a regular ripping blade and make the dado one cut at a time. At this point, the dado should be just a little too narrow, and then you can begin tapping that fence ever so slightly outward, making the cut and rechecking the fit until it fits perfectly. Another form of referential measurement is outside in construction, which comes in really handy when building cabinets. So let's say you want to build a cabinet with a specific height or depth. You want to cut the sides of the cabinet to those exact dimensions, and then once the cabinet box is built, everything else that gets built and installed inside of it is built to the exact dimensions of the box that you have. Learning to use referential measurements is going to take your projects to the next level and save a lot of frustration and second guessing. One of the first things that new woodworkers are going to face when getting started is the absolute crippling anxiety they get over what tools they should be buying. And look, there are a load of tools in woodworking, and the price range between entry level and top tier can be pretty surprising and yet even discouraging at times. But there are no shortage of lists and videos out on the internet about what tools a new woodworker should be buying. And in your efforts to drink from that absolute fire hose of advice, you're going to find yourself right here on YouTube watching videos by woodworkers with large followings and absolutely decked out shops. And they aren't going to be using any of the tools in those lists. And cue that anxiety. Oh boy, now you're questioning all the advice. Do I buy the budget beginner tools, or do I buy once, cry once, and plunk down the money for the most expensive tools to build furniture that someone other than my mother will love? Well, in all the anxiousness, I think you're kind of putting the cart before the horse, because expensive tools don't make you a better woodworker, they just make your woodworking better.
You just said the same thing twice.
Nope, what I mean by that is when you buy expensive tools, you're not buying actual woodworking skill and know-how. Those are things that you have to learn over time. When you invest in expensive tools, what you're buying is a more pleasant, less frustrating experience in the shop. So, what is all that money getting you? Well, typically when you buy more expensive tools, what you're paying for is reliability, repeatability, and better features. These tools are more reliable because they're made with stronger materials, they have better, higher quality motors, or they just have better QC processes in the factory, and these products are engineered better to perform the tasks that they're designed for. Like when you set your table saw fence to a specific setting, does it hold that setting over and over again, or does it deflect? Take the Festool domino, for example. This creates floating tenon joinery. That joinery's actually been around for ages, long before the domino was invented. And there are different ways you can accomplish it. You can use dowels or you can use biscuits. You can even use a router to cut the mortises and then make your own floating tenons like these dominoes. But when it comes to the speed and accuracy of using this tool, along with its dust collection, nothing else touches it. You will absolutely have a more enjoyable time woodworking with this tool, but you don't need it to do good work. So, where does that leave the new woodworker? Well, in my opinion, what you should do is buy the best version of any tool that you can afford right now and just start building. Learn the skills that you need to learn first and then acquire better and better tools as you move forward. Heck, this shop is not where I started from. I started in a 2-car garage with this saw, the first power tool that I ever owned. And over the course of 10 years, I built my shop up methodically to what it is today. And guess what? Your first projects are not going to be your best work, no matter how expensive the tools are that you own. So, if a Craig jig and a circular saw are the best that you can do right now, just roll with it and don't let that keep you from getting started. And now you know.
And knowing is half the battle.